Hey friends, it's another week of bad science, and this time around I decided to dip back into that deep well of primeval inanity, the creationists. So I was browsing around and I came across the most amazing example. This is Pastor Steve Waldron of the New Life Church in Albany, Georgia, who has a little YouTube video in which he claims that evolution is obviously wrong. And he's going to explain why. And it's the most incredible thing ever. I wish all the creationists were this blatant and this easy to dismiss, but here he goes. So take it away, Steve.
We're going to look at ways Darwinian evolution is obviously wrong. Now, we could go into it scientifically. I teach Science in the Bible 1 and 2 at Indiana Bible College.
Well, that explains a lot. So, you know how every creationist comes out and announces that, oh, they really understand science. And once they too were an evolutionist, think of people like Ken Ham and Kent Hovind and all that who claim to understand science. Well, this is how it comes to be, is they had ignorant teachers who taught a misbegotten version of science, and then they think they know it all.
They don't even know what evolution is anymore. You know, they know the basics, but some of the mechanisms, it's like, we just don't have a clue. Let's just look at some of the obviousness of the fallacies of Darwinian evolution. Look at yourself. You know, the scripture says that you're fearfully and wonderfully made. And I may go into a little bit later in this little session on how Darwinian evolution is totally incompatible with scripture. Doesn't matter what they taught you at college, it is just totally incompatible.
Well, for once, there's something I can agree with. I agree. Science and the kind of literalist fundamental batshit crazy religion that Pastor Steve is believing in is incompatible with science. So you really have two choices then. You can either reject science and dedicate yourself to the faith of the Bible, but in that case, how can you then claim that you are defending science, or that you're teaching science, or that you understand science? He has just announced that he rejects it. It's incompatible with his religious belief. On the other hand, you could do as I have, which is to reject the religion and accept the science. And there we have no incompatibilities, no hypocrisy, because you'll notice I'm not then claiming that I am a pastor of some faith. I have not bought into that one and the other one both at the same time, unlike Pastor Steve. Okay, so what he's going to do is he claims he has an obvious example of the failure of evolutionary theory. And actually he's got a bunch of examples. I won't go through them all. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to sit back and let Pastor Steve hang himself with his own words. So enjoy.
But let's look at like a shoulder joint, for example. Okay, so your shoulder fits into a joint. It is a socket. And then it's got tendons, it's got nerves, it's got capillaries, it's got blood vessels, it's got veins running through it. And it is a perfect machine. Now let's just think about this. Let's say you're coming up from the gook, and all of this, and you're some type of protoplasm or some intermediary life form, which they've never found any of these. They just don't exist in the fossil record. The fossil record should be overwhelming that And it's none of that. There's a few, all the supposed ones would fit on this table in front of me. But the whole fossil record should be a chain of that. But they're all fully formed, fully filled. Come on, somebody's stealing your lunch money there. All right, so how would this partial being, just, a shoulder joint, which we take for granted, what mechanisms is this a third of the way done, dangling, useless, because it only works if it's perfect? And so for generation after generation, it's flopping there. And so after millions of years, which they say hominids have only been around for 1.2 million years, so you can't even use the time plus nothing, thing there. So over a few 100,000 years, that somehow this bone being useless in this socket and these veins perfected themselves to where it works now.
When I first heard this nonsense, my first urge was, well, I got to make a YouTube video in which I explain the details of the anatomy of the pectoral girdle of various animals. And I thought about it, and yeah, I could do that, but it's overkill and it's irrelevant because his errors are so grossly fundamental and so absurd that it's not appropriate to give him details. We got to deal with the gross nature of his problem, which is that he thinks that our ancestors went through stages where they had incomplete organs. So he talks about the shoulder joint, and he claims that there was a period when the shoulder joint was incomplete and our ancestors were just kind of walking around with floppy shoulders, that they lacked circulatory systems and nervous systems, and it was all just a big mess in there, that it was only partially complete and would be totally non-functional. That's not the case. No evolutionist, no evolutionary biologist claims such a thing. We claim that they were functional all the way back. So long ago, we have, like, for instance, Tiktaalik. Oh, we go further back. We go to fish. Fish have a pectoral girdle that supports their pectoral fins. And they're perfectly functional for that. But, of course, they're not going to be able to climb in a tree and throw a baseball. So they've got a fully functional girdle for their function. And that what we then have is progressive, gradual change in different lineages in different directions to produce, in each case, a fully functional limb, but not necessarily a human limb. That we're going to get to that at some point later. So the whole argument is bogus. He doesn't understand what he's talking about. So there was no stage in our evolution where we were dragging about useless forearms that just dangled there limply and then didn't have a vascular supply or a nerve supply. This is just something straight out of Pastor Steve's rather feeble imagination. This is not how evolution works. What he's saying is so stupid that even I am embarrassed for him. This is terrible stuff. This is unbelievably bad. This is a guy who has zero grounding in basic science education, yet he is teaching children this nonsense. Yeah, maybe I'm embarrassed for him, but I'm also kind of pissed off because this is a guy who should not be allowed anywhere near a science classroom. He doesn't understand the subject he is lecturing us all on. Okay, so he's going to go on and on. He's going to give us a whole series of things that he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand how fingers evolved, right? Because it would have just been floppy and useless. He doesn't understand, oh, this one is embarrassing. He doesn't understand how people could have evolved with reproductive organs that fit into females. Yeah. That's what we're dealing with here, is somebody who doesn't understand coevolution either. Doesn't seem to understand that men and women are the same species, that they didn't evolve separately. Okay, but I'm not going to waste your time with all that. I'll give you one more example. This is Pastor Steve talking about how eyes couldn't have evolved. And boy, is it bad.
So evolution, your eye, you got this blob of protoplasm there, and it's passed on from generation to generation to generation for hundreds of thousands of years till finally, it works and it goes to your brain. And so we walked around blind till our eyes worked, and nothing got us. Well, they were all blind too, the T-Rexes and everything. Oh, but wait, they weren't coterminous with me.
So he thinks there was a time when humans didn't have eyes and they were wandering around blindly, and then suddenly, splat, eyeballs appeared, fully functional. No. Chordate eyes evolved about 450 million years ago. And ever since, every one of our ancestors had fully functional eyes. There was no blind stage in human evolution. So here's the thing. Pastor Steve is smart enough to read and write, but apparently he has never read any of the most basic books in biology. And that's terrible. And yet he's now declaring himself a teacher of science. Put the Bible down and go read something. That's what I would say. Which returns me to his point that religion and science are incompatible, and I have to agree completely that he's a walking, talking demonstration of the incompatibility of his kind of literalist religion with any kind of science. It's disgraceful. Okay, one last thing. People have apparently jumped all over him in other videos, and I can understand that. This guy's an easy target, and I'm sure there have been multiple videos just pointing and laughing at this bozo. And he's noticed. That's the amusing thing. He has noticed all this criticism. So his comment is pinned on the video, and it's the most pathetic set of excuses for his ignorance. Okay, so there are two videos apparently debunking his video, and he flatters them first by saying that they're extremely well done and well researched. I am impressed with the knowledge that the presenter has. Okay, but a few things he wants to say. I'm not at all impressed with the knowledge that Pastor Steve demonstrates. He is a black hole of knowledge. So he's got a couple of excuses here. One is there were a few things he took out of context. Who does Pastor Steve think he is? Sam Harris? He says that should be clear watching his presentations and the video above. No, there is no context that can salvage the nonsense that Pastor Steve is saying. I went through the whole thing. There is nothing that he can make up to excuse the stupidity that he has put on display. So that's totally bogus. Also, he doesn't mention specifically what these things are that are somehow rescued by the context. Then he says there were some non sequiturs. On some points, much information was given, but the information didn't necessarily debunk the point at hand. Once again, overwhelming vagueness. What point does he think was still valid? What point does he want to argue should not be criticized, that was improperly addressed? Because everything Pastor Steve said was so idiotic that there was nothing that he could salvage it with. And then thirdly, he points out the comments on this channel are abusive in many instances and hilarious in others. Saying someone is fat or stupid certainly doesn't further discourse or knowledge. I kind of agree with that, but that's irrelevant. That's what he would call a non sequitur. The fact that commenters said offensive things does not mean that the points that were made against him don't count. So that's kind of annoying. Then he says there are a few other middling points that I won't go into now. Of course not. There's no points he can address. And he's not going to tell us which ones are the middling points, which one are substantial. It's the most horrible apology ever. Just remember, well-presented error is just that, error. That's an interesting thing to say, given that his errors were not well presented and there were still errors. And he says, I have prayed and by God's grace will continue to pray for the maker of the rebuttal videos and everyone that has watched them, that God's grace, love, and mercy will be upon you and that he will open your eyes to his saving truth. Love you. God bless. Much more to say, but that's all for now. This was put up about a year ago, so he hasn't said anything more about this. I hope he's crawled away with his tail between his legs and is feeling a little embarrassed about it all. Okay. But I'm going to include one last incredibly self-referential word from Pastor Steve. Take it away again, Pastor Steve.
And so people who believe in that have been inaccurately taught, are looking at things very superficially.
Well, all I can say is, bless your heart, Pastor Steve. Bless your heart. Okay, well, I'm going to end it there. There was not much to say about this video. It was so bad, so incredibly bad. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to leave you with my usual scrolling list of patrons. Thank you, people. You've done a great job helping me so far. I will also mention that we're having a fundraiser for Freethought Blogs, and I'll include a link down below to that. Please do join us in that. And now I have a few photographs of the trees in my front yard. They're not very exciting, but in the last few weeks I posted a few photos of them because they were spectacularly colorful with golden orange leaves bursting out all over the place. That was a few weeks ago, but now that's over. It looks like it's winter now. So instead you get these barren skeletal trees all over the place already. Yeah, it's mid-October. We had our first snow. Looks like it's going to be a fun winter. Okay, talk to you next week.